Hello, and welcome to AspieCast episode 4. I'm Stephen Michael, and this is a podcast designed for people with Asperger's or who suspect they may have Asperger's, or maybe that you're an admirer of an Aspie, or you suspect someone that you are close to maybe has Asperger's. The goal is to give information from an insider perspective of what it's like to be living with Asperger's in terms of real life experiences. And these are just so you can have data points and see the kind of things that affect other people. And hopefully, from that, gain a little bit more relief or knowledge that others might be going through the same sort of social situations or results from social interaction as those that I'm talking about in this podcast. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, it will be great if you have some experiences that you want to share or that you think are good topics for discussion, or experiences that haven't been covered yet and you think should be. So send your thoughts and suggestions to aspiecast@gmail.com, aspiecast@gmail.com. And I can't promise that I will respond to everything that's coming in, but I definitely will read everything that's coming in. So with Asperger's, a lot of people say that they would not ever want to be a non-Aspie. People with Asperger's say they would not want to give up having Asperger's if they could, because they've achieved certain things in life or been able to accomplish certain things because of Asperger's. I think that's true for myself, but what I'm going to be talking about today is, for me, one of the most painful aspects of Asperger's, and it would be something that I believe would be a reason for myself to want to start over without Asperger's, if that were possible. The topic I'm going to be talking about today is perseveration, and it's a known trait that can be one of the symptoms that helps determine if someone has Asperger syndrome. If you're not familiar, perseveration is describing what it sounds like. It's about persevering. Now, ordinarily, persevering is something you consider good. You want to persevere in your goals towards becoming skilled at your job or becoming an expert at certain things. If you're a person that wants to be a cook or something as your hobby, you want to persevere in refining your skills. However, perseveration actually has sort of a negative vibe to it, not like persevere. And if you look it up on Google, don't even have to go into the links that come up, but you'll see Wikipedia has, entry for perseveration. Dictionary.com does. If you go to the Wikipedia entry, you'll find that it's related to psychology and psychiatry, and they indicate that it's something that can result from brain injury. Now, that's right away not something that sounds good. If you go to the dictionary.com definition, it gets even more extreme. And it says, in psychiatry, the pathological, persistent repetition of a word, gesture, or act, often associated with brain damage or schizophrenia. So that doesn't sound good. Who wants to be thought of as having brain damage or schizophrenia? And I think that's how people may have been seeing me throughout my life. I've struggled with perseveration throughout my life, and I say struggled. It's not quite a struggle, because as I'm going to be talking about, I have no clue that I'm even doing it when I'm doing it. It's so fundamental to the way my brain operates. And I'd love to know if other folks have opinions on perseveration and whether they can sense that it's happening or not. Um, so what I want to cover here is, how does it feel to be engaged in perseveration from the perspective of the Asperger's person, the Aspie mind? And what can it cause in the work environment or in scenarios involving friends? And then I want to mention what I consider may be the only way to understand what it's like on the other side. That is, the person that an Aspie is interacting with who is receiving a form of perseveration in the conversation. So again, I'm going to be talking about perseveration in the form of verbal perseveration, um, as mentioned in the definitions that you can find online. It doesn't have to be verbal. It could be gestures and things like that. But I'm going to be talking about verbal perseveration, uh, words and concepts and things that occur within real time as you're communicating with others. So for me, I guess another way to describe it is harping on something and or just not giving up because you're seeking an answer or a response that matches the concept that you're trying to convey in a conversation. Now, the really problematic aspect that I've experienced for perseveration is that I now consider it almost a direct path to being painfully alone. A direct path to being alone. It generates anger on the part of others that you're interacting with. And they may or may not express that anger. They may just, decide that they're not going to continue interacting with you. As I've mentioned in a previous episode, I've lost many friends throughout my years, not quite knowing the real cause. And I suspect perseveration played a role. I know in at least two cases it was the cause. Um, but it in the conversations that involve perseveration, the other person may reach a boiling point, um, and then become either very angry or um, convey such negative vibes that you become stunned and you don't necessarily know how to react. That's my situations, and if it's a business situation, you don't know how to react in a way that helps you save face and maybe stay, you know, respected or respectable. It's very awkward. And because of this, because these angry responses can come in sometimes, I guess, out of the blue, it seems like. I say that because for me, I never realized that I was being, or I was perseverating. I don't have a good way to describe that. So I didn't know I was being perseveracious. I'll make that word up. Um, I just thought I was communicating and having a conversation. And all of a sudden, these conversations turn angry on the part of the other person. And it comes as a huge shock. And that generates a fair amount of mental pain, on my side, because I had no clue that, I was doing something wrong. And especially in my case, I see a lot of things in black and white, well, right and wrong. And all of a sudden, if I generate anger in somebody else, I must have done something wrong, especially considering the level of the anger that comes back at me. But I don't see anything. All I see is little old me trying to have a conversation with somebody and trying to be social or to be collaborative in the work environment. And so it's very painful. It's painful because it hurts when somebody gets angry at you, and it hurts more because you don't know what caused it. You just know it was something you did wrong. It's not easy to sense that you are perseverating, at least for me. Um, so I want to give a couple of experiences. In one case, I was kicked out of a house of a very long time college friend, knowing her maybe 20 years. And I didn't know what was going on, but she did explain it in a letter later that kind of helped me. But basically, we were talking about something that I thought was interesting to both of us. And she says, "Well, I don't want to talk about that." And I felt kind of hurt. So I pushed it a little bit and said, "Why? I thought we were okay talking about this particular topic." And it was just general business stuff. And she says, "Oh, no, I just don't want to talk about that." And I was, I guess, pushing it, and I didn't realize I was pushing it in a way that made her angry. Um, because after a few more go-arounds, when I was just trying to say, "Hey, I'm not trying to, do anything bad. I just was really excited about what we were talking about up until the minute you said you didn't want to talk about it." Um, she sort of, reached her threshold and invited me to leave. And I didn't quite know. I just knew that I had a real strong feeling that I wasn't trying to do anything bad. And I wanted her to know that I wasn't trying to do anything bad, and for me, it was a great thing to be able to talk about the particular business aspect that we had been engaged in many times before. I guess in hindsight, yeah, if somebody tells you they don't want to talk about it, it would be respectful to say, "Oh, okay, I understand." But for some reason, I felt like I hadn't meant to do anything wrong, and I got this urge to convey that, and it didn't work. But again, I didn't realize that part of the reason she got more and more angry was because I kept pushing it. And I kept pushing it because she kept getting more and more angry, I guess. I don't know. But she did end up writing me a letter, and she said that she doesn't like it when I harp on things, and that she never liked that particular aspect of me. So I found out with her letter that I had done that, throughout our friendship, and I had no idea that. Nobody ever tells you. They just get mad, and it's hard for people to tell you things that maybe they don't like about you, especially if there are good parts to a relationship. Um, but anyway, it's just awkward. I had almost the same thing with somebody else where it was a longtime friend. We were sitting having maybe a coffee or something outside in a nice place and discussing um, random life topics. And he was struggling with something, and I said, "Well, you might want to consider getting a professional help." And he got very angry and shut that conversation down on his side. He says, "No, not going to talk that way. Not going to talk about that." And that kind of hurt on my side. So I think I just had this urge inside me because I had felt some hurt for being shut down when I really had no bad intent. And I started saying, "Well, what's wrong with that?" I felt mistreated, and I just wanted to get past it. And I didn't want to have somebody just shut me down. Uh, it just puts me in some kind of feeling that was very strong. And if I could just talk about it, yeah, great. And because I just felt like, hey, I didn't mean anything bad, so why are you going to treat me like that? Now, it was probably a minor thing, but for some reason in my mind, it was pretty major because I felt like I had done something wrong. And maybe it's because I have such a strong right and wrong uh, sense that doing something wrong is really bad. So when somebody considers that I've done or conveys that I've done something wrong, I feel like it's a horrible, tragic thing. That could be part of why I end up in this perseveration mode. I'm not sure. Um, but I want to take this into the work realm. But first, just suffice it to say that those two friends I never talked to ever again, even though they were, in one case it was 10 years friendship, in the other case probably 20 years, because I just couldn't get out of my head how hurt I was uh, by being basically accused of doing something wrong in a way that was, designed to shut me down from my goal of having more conversation about something innocuous that I thought was innocuous. Um, and I guess in the case of the 10-year relationship, um, the guy friend, I did try to work through it with him over the phone for maybe the next 6 months. And the more I talked about it, the more angry he got, to the point where he said, "Yeah, we're done." I think we tried to meet in person one time, and he was just so angry at me for perseverating, and I didn't quite see the whole picture. And like I said, I'm gonna mention later on in this episode the one time that I saw probably 90% of the picture on what it's like to be on the receiving side, and then it started making sense. But I want to mention a work experience. Um, I've always been someone who succeeds pretty well at work. I'm able to solve a lot of problems in a lot of different realms. And in one part of my career, I had invented some software, and it was very expensive software. It sold for like $20,000 per installation. And it was a startup company. It was tough to make sales. I mean, when you have software that's that expensive and it's a niche business market that buys it, um, it's it's not that you can just go out and sell it. You have to go through a lot of motions, and it takes months for each copy to be sold. Um, anyway, the issue there is that we had one customer that had bought this product, and that customer had some um, technical needs that we answered for free, and it wasn't too horrible, but it involved maybe a day or two of labor on the part of some of the workers at this particular company that I was with. And the company's president wanted to, bill this particular customer for that work. Now that sounds fine. They wanted to bill about $5,000, and I don't know why it was that much, but that's okay. It was. At the same time, exact same time though, this particular customer was making it clear that they were interested in buying another copy of the software, and it might have been $30,000 worth. I don't recall, but somewhere between 20 and 30,000. The president of the company put the chief financial officer in charge of getting the $5,000 tech support fee paid, and I had a real strong feeling that if we charge them $5,000, we're risking, for various reasons, we're risking keeping the customer happy enough that they'd buy this other copy for another $20,000 or $30,000. So when the chief financial officer would come to me and say, hey, give me some details on the technical support services that we gave so that I can write up a bill. And I said, well, wait a minute, why would you want to, risk the 30,000 by billing them now for 5,000? And he didn't really respond to that. And so that put me into perseveration mode, and I didn't really know it. It just seemed like such an extremely easy, simple, obvious choice. If you're a startup company hoping to earn $25,000 or $30,000, and you think that it's, potential risk of that sale happening by submitting a bill beforehand for 5,000, that just sounded to me ridiculous. So I kind of repeated that several times during this conversation with the chief financial officer. And he finally got very nasty in his tone of voice, and he said, "Yes, I understand what you're saying." Now, up until that point, I didn't understand that he knew what I was saying and that he was giving validity to what I was saying. He was just doing his job, but I didn't pick up on that, I guess. So end result is what became I guess, or is a common result from my perseveration activities throughout my life, which is if somebody doesn't acknowledge that they have received the message that I'm harping on, for whatever reason, I assume they didn't get it. And and yet what happens is once they even, they may get the message, but they don't want to say it for whatever reason. And that, again, that makes no sense to me. But, eventually they get overwhelmed with my harping on the point, and then they give me a nasty response back, and I have no clue why it was so nasty. So in this particular case, the chief financial officer, um, he got angry with me, and only at that point did I realize, or did I learn, that he did indeed understand the silliness and ridiculousness of risking a $30,000 sale by trying to bill for $5,000 beforehand. And that 5,000 was not something that the customer had even knew was coming. So it would have been a nasty. Uh, it would have been received in a negative way by that customer. And anyway, at this company, when I left, I did make contact with somebody for some reason later on, 6 months or a year later, and she told me that I was notorious in the company for wanting everything my way. And I think that may be a indication that I had been always engaged in perseveration at that company. And I was really stunned by that comment, because I always thought, hey, wait a minute, I'm not that important. I'm not capable of, making people feel strong emotions. So why would I be labeled as notorious? That's the bad thing. And she emphasized, Steve, you were notorious. Um, so I believe that perseveration was part of that. Um, it was also confusing to me because I kept making, lots and lots of raises and stuff at the company, and being, acknowledged for coming up with some excellent ideas and things that would be, lucrative and, you know, just generally good things to help the company move forward. So it's really strange mixed messaging. You know, the signals conflicted, and in the midst of things going on and concepts being discussed, I've never been able to sense, that I'm engaged in perseveration, and that not being able to sense it, I guess, is potentially what's bad. Um, because if I could, I guess I would stop it and then not have this sudden, angry, nasty response come at me over and over. And what happens, when you get enough of those angry responses, as I've had from, gosh, maybe age 5 onward, um, you do various things. You shut down. You think that it's just too hard to talk to people because you don't know if something like that's going to happen, without even knowing why or when. And that was my case. I never knew why or when I'm going to get a nasty response, because I never knew I would have been perseverating. Um, it can make you shut down and say, well, I'm just not going to talk to people. And that really screws up your ability to thrive at work and in friendships and stuff, or even to make friends. The other thing it does is it makes it take a lot more courage to engage in conversations with people and to be social with people. Um, that means more energy has to be spent in your mind, I guess, to interact. And in a future episode, I will get into how I had to rely on liquid courage, as they call it, just to be able to have, the calmness to engage in conversations. And I will say that the liquid courage can really mess things up even more. It may, it may make it easier and less energy intensive to engage in conversation, but it can also drive things in really haywire. And in one case, I was in a business meeting, and it involved, wine on three parts, and I had no clue, but I was perseverating and not knowing it. Didn't think I was. Didn't get any response from the other two people in the meeting that I was, other than some very, I guess, subtle remarks. And I need literal. I need somebody to tell me directly. And it just didn't happen until such point as one of the people with me said, "I'm just not comfortable with this conversation, and I'm about to leave if it doesn't stop." And then the other person says, "Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have put a stop to it earlier." Well, that just made me so ashamed, and I had no freaking clue how to get out of that situation with any sort of respect or saving face. So I apologized and I left. But talk about devastating. I mean, it was so shameful because I didn't know I was perseverating, and it got to the point where somebody was going to leave if I didn't stop. And to be in a, me and two other adults in that situation just made me feel so little, and just devastating. Because you're in your 40s and that stuff happens. Where do you go from there? How do you save face? Just don't know. Um, and that's partly why this episode took a lot of tries, because to try and rehash some of these things, even though I haven't gone into too much detail, is one of the hardest things. It's similar to going over painful interactions over and over, wishing it could have happened differently. Um, these are the kind of interactions that I have to keep out of my mind, and it takes so much effort to keep them from coming back and haunting me. But I want to mention them just because maybe there's other folks out there that have had the same scenario where they're talking and suddenly this negative energy comes in and you don't know why, and maybe you feel ashamed or you lose face or you don't understand why the negativity came at you, so you know curtail your interactions with other people. And then that gets into what I was talking about earlier, the direct path to being alone. Now, one of the other things I wanted to mention is that I do have a feeling that Aspies can see connections between things and concepts that maybe a lot of other people do not see. Now, I never thought this to be the case until meeting somebody else with Asperger's who mentioned he had a very high IQ, but that manifested itself for him in the ability to make connections between concepts. Um, and I can talk more about connections later on, but a real interesting connection type that I just saw on TV today. This will give some time reference to this episode, and it's not necessarily related to Asperger's, but a teenager won a science fair because he realized or calculated that if the government of the United States switched from Times New Roman font on their publications to Garamond, they could save something like $284 million per year, because of the smaller amount of ink used. Garamond font has thinner lines and less horizontal space. Um, so this particular science fair winner, teenager, had made that connection between fonts and money, and I think that's an awesome connection to make, and it's the kind of connection I would love to make. Um, So, anyways, the reason I'm mentioning connections and seeing connections is I've always felt or assumed that other people could see the same connections. So when I'm talking to people, they can see the obvious connection. For example, that you don't want to risk a $30,000 sale by sending an unexpected bill for $5,000 that may piss off the customer. Um, I have a feeling that because I assume that other people can see the same connections I can, that I can engage in conversations with them on some sort of level that they'll be able to respond directly to my concerns. And I don't have to talk down to them by saying, well, here's the connection that I see that's going to make the overall outcome negative. Um, something tells me, oh, in those cases that, I want just a very honest, literal response, and then I can, know how to proceed in the conversation. Um, and something tells me that that's maybe part of the problem, that other people don't see the same connections, or they don't see them right away, and I'm not willing to explain them because I think that would be talking down to somebody. I think everybody can see the same connections, and I think maybe they can't in hindsight. Um, so people uh, can't see the connections, then they get angry when they finally, get too much harping on something. Um, and the one time that something really obvious came at me at work, where there was a real strong connection between doing something in, you know, method number one would have caused a negative outcome, and method number two would have caused a positive outcome. I could see a clear connection. And the person that was asking me for information that affected the choice of method one or method two, and again, I don't remember the outcome, but what I remember is it was an engineer who was asking me for my input. And I was very clear, and I probably harping on the fact that method, two, let's say, was the one that was going to have a positive outcome, and method one was going to be hurtful. So I kept harping on it, and he said, I understand exactly where you're coming from, but I'm going to go with method one. I'm not going to go with your idea. And for me, that was great because I had no reason to keep going, because I realized he was telling me very literally that he was making a conscious decision to go with uh, his method, um, and that he understood where I was coming from. And that's the kind of thing that, boy, if that was something that other people would do on a regular basis, I probably wouldn't do any perseveration. Or if people could just be able to explain where they're coming from. But I think it's probably hard for people. The person that kicked me out of her house because she didn't want to discuss the stuff that I had been trying to discuss, and felt like I was, somehow being accused of something wrong by venturing into that space. If she had just said, "Wow, this actually hurts me to think about this kind of stuff. I got to keep it out of my brain. So hopefully you can understand. I need to move on to another topic." If she had gone that far, I think I would have realized I didn't do something wrong, and I wouldn't have harped on it. But I guess that was too much for her to do, and it's like maybe more energy and honesty and self-exposure than the average person wants to do. And I think I can understand that, but it's not something that I ever knew was, something that isn't going to be happening on a regular basis. So, yeah, I think that's that's what I want to convey, is those experiences. And I'd love if folks out there can send me their experiences, because perseveration isn't something that I think is talked about too much as an Aspie symptom. Um, but again, to summarize how it feels on my side, is it's invisible to me. I don't realize that I'm engaged in it, and then suddenly I get some really nasty or negative, stuff coming back as if I did something terribly wrong, and then I feel horrible because I feel either ashamed or falsely accused. Oftentimes falsely accused, which is very upsetting. And then I really want to perseverate. I want to say, why are you, in my mind, I would say, why are you suggesting that I did something wrong? Um, so a lot of pain, and then you get loneliness and depression, because it just takes so much energy to try and risk going into more human interaction, social interactions, with other people, because you don't know if this criticism is going to, or negative attitudes are going to come flying out at you without any understanding of why. So here's what I wanted to mention, though, is the way I found out what it's like on the other side, and it was two parts. Um, First of all, I was always struggling with, why would people get mad at me if I have no bad intent, or sometimes I call it malintent, in what I'm saying, and this is separate even from perseverating. If I say something and I'm just trying to be funny, I don't have any malintent, but people get frustrated or upset. I've always been struggling with why would somebody do that. I'm not an obnoxious person in my own mind. I'm very timid. Anyway, I've always struggled with that concept and why people might get frustrated with me and when I say something that isn't meant to be bad. And I was talking to somebody, and he explained to me that in practical terms, it doesn't matter what your intent was. It's how was it received on the part of the other person. That's the stuff that drives the outcome more than what you intended. So that was something that sort of like a rule that I guess I decided that makes sense to some degree, and I can live by that rule. So that helped me to move forward. And of course, I had to be freaking 42 years old before I learned that, you know. But anyway, it helped me a lot to have that as a rule to abide by. And so now I can be a little more descriptive or elaborate more when I sense that somebody might take me incorrectly, take my intent to be negative. But the more important um, thing that I was extremely lucky to have experienced, and I don't know if other people will ever get the chance, on average, to experience this, is from another Aspie who ended up perseverating over a month or two of time about one particular issue. And only then did I realize he was perseverating and how painful it was on my side to be on the receiving side of it. What happened was I'm going to try and keep this short, but this was back when Obama won the election for the first time, and I was on the happy, wonderful emotion side of that particular event. Sorry if that is not you. Um, but me and him and another person wanted to go out and see if people were celebrating on the streets. So we hopped in my car and I was driving around the city, and sure enough, tons of people out there honking their horns, screaming, hooting and hollering on the sidewalk. And the horn honking was all over the place, and it was really great because you honk your horn and then everybody around you starts honking back, and sidewalk people start saying, hey, they start yelling. So I was honking the horn like crazy because it was such a cool interaction medium, just for that 1 hour or so that we were driving around. Anyway, this friend of mine was in the passenger seat, and he says, hey, could you lay off the horn for 5 minutes? And so I tried, and then I slowly over the next couple of minutes, I got back into it, those little toots and tweets here and there. And then he just got really, really freaked out and demanded that I take him back home. And he really threw a fit and screamed really loudly about how, I'm just a sort of a scream of pain. And I think it makes sense. Aspies are, hypersensitive to certain sensory inputs. And in his case, the horn was really intense. Makes sense. I mean, it definitely was loud. But I had no clue that it was really affecting him that much. And I need literal communication. So if he says lay off the horn for a few minutes or 5 minutes, that doesn't mean the same thing to me as your horn honking is becoming very painful to me, and I just need to ask you to hold off because of the pain that I'm going through. Anyway, that was what I wish I had heard. But, being the Aspie, not having exactly good terms or exact terms, I just went back into this mode of honking the horn. Well, he would not let go of that situation, and over the next couple of months, we would meet every couple of weeks just to chat or have a coffee or something, and he would bring it up again and say, you really owe me an apology, and you had me trapped in that car, this and that, and at first I didn't think too much of it, but it kept coming back up as a repeated topic, and then I realized, wait a minute, boy, this is starting to get obnoxious. But not only that, it's exactly how I've been engaging with certain other people. In his case, he was more extreme than I had been to other people, because he was telling me I had done something really bad to him and I owed him an apology. And it got to the point where I reached a threshold and I said, well, that's not going to happen, so goodbye, and I walked away. And boy, the look on his face was just painful. I mean, I could tell he was in a huge amount of hurt. And I believe that he was going through the same sorts of mental anguish at the time, because of my reaction. It really can hurt inside when your brain is really harping on something inside that is an open wound. And what can you do with an open wound that's involves um, human interaction to solve the wound? What do you do? Uh, so it's really painful, and I don't think there's a good solution. I mean, I just don't know. So far, the only solution I know is to try to be more shallow with interactions, which I hate. I want meaningful interactions with people. I have to be more shallow. I have to accept the fact that in a work situation that I may not have the chance to explain or make it clear where somebody's making a huge financial risk or mistake. I'm trying to be more comfortable with allowing things to fail. And I hate that, because this is what really drives me crazy is um, I can see a lot of things that are going to fail before they fail, and then they do fail, and then it confirms that I'm able to see the connections in advance. But if I make those connections clear to people in advance and it doesn't go anywhere, that's crazy. I mean, it's a real bizarre situation. And in the cases that I get uptight about, it's because these are connections that if somebody did the right thing earlier on, then not only would I benefit, but they would benefit financially because of decisions. Anyway, that's all kind of complex, but I guess what it means is the perseveration issue is something that I struggle with like crazy, and the only way I've learned to get around it is to try and be more shallow, and I hate that. I really do. Um, and at the same time, I do get confused because I hear things like something I heard the other day about Winston Churchill saying you got to keep pounding on your issue if you want it to really work. So we got big old Winston Churchill there basically saying to keep perseverating, and then we got life and loneliness and mental anguish telling you quit perseverating, don't harp on stuff. So anyway, I would love to hear more about your experiences, be they with perseveration or uh, any other aspects of Asperger syndrome, or if you're on the receiving side of perseveration and you have some suggestions, or if you know how to deal with the anguish that can be experienced from either the Aspie side or the receiving side. Please do send an email to aspiecast@gmail.com. Um, and any experiences that you want to send that you think are worth talking about on this podcast would be great. So again, thank you, and I will try to be more regular with episodes here. But episodes like this one take a long time to mentally put together because of the pain of going through these previous experiences that I've really needed to put out of my mind to prevent me from getting back into depression. So thanks again, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Take care.